It was a bright, sunny afternoon in Oakwood. Oakwood was a small, quiet neighborhood where houses sat close together, and kids played in the yards. Everyone seemed to know everyone, or at least, that's what they thought. The streets were lined with green trees, and birds chirped happily in the air. It felt like a peaceful place, the kind where nothing big ever happened. But on this day, something big was about to happen. And it all started with a guy named Big Shaq. Big Shaq was a tall man with a wide, friendly smile that made people feel good. He wasn't skinny or fat, just big, strong, and full of energy. His skin was dark, and he had short hair that he kept neat. He wore a red t-shirt and blue jeans that day, nothing fancy, just comfy clothes for walking around. Big Shaq had lived in Oakwood for years. He wasn't new. He wasn't a stranger. He belonged there, just like the trees and the birds. Every day, he walked down the street with his head up, saying hi to people he passed. Kids loved him because he'd wave at them or toss them a ball if they dropped one. Old ladies smiled when he carried their heavy grocery bags to their doors. Big Shaq was the kind of guy who made the neighborhood feel warm and happy. But not everyone liked Big Shaq. Some people didn't see the friendly guy with the big smile. They didn't see the man who helped kids and old ladies. Nope. They only saw one thing, his skin. Big Shaq was black, and to a few folks in Oakwood, that was a problem. They didn't say it out loud most of the time, but you could tell by the way they looked at him. Their eyes got narrow, and their mouths turned down, like they were mad about something. They acted like he didn't fit in, even though he'd lived there longer than some of them. It wasn't fair, but that's how it was. And on this sunny afternoon, one of those people was about to cause trouble. Let me tell you about that day. Big Shaq woke up early, like he always did. The sun was shining through his window, making his little house feel bright. He lived in a yellow house on Maple Street, number 24. It wasn't a big house, but it was his, and he liked it. He ate some cereal for breakfast, crunchy stuff with milk, and then decided to take a walk. He grabbed a few bucks from his table, slipped on his sneakers, and headed out. The air smelled fresh, like grass and flowers. Big Shaq took a deep breath and smiled. He loved days like this. He thought he'd walk to the little store a few streets over, buy some apples, and maybe say hi to his friend who worked there. It was a simple plan, nothing special. Just a normal day, or so he thought. As he walked, Big Shaq whistled a little tune. His sneakers tapped the sidewalk, making a soft sound. He waved at a kid riding a bike. "Hey, buddy," he called, and the kid waved back, grinning. He passed Mrs. Jenkins, an old lady with white hair, watering her flowers. "Morning, Mrs. J," he said. She looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Shaq. You're looking happy today." Big Shaq nodded. "Always happy on a sunny day," he said, and kept walking. Everything seemed perfect. The sun was warm, the sky was blue, and the neighborhood was calm. But trouble was waiting just around the corner. Here's where things get interesting. Not everyone in Oakwood was like the kids or Mrs. Jenkins. Some people didn't wave back. Some people didn't smile. And one guy, his name was Carl, didn't like Big Shaq at all. Carl lived across the street from Shaq, in a white house with a big front porch. Carl was older, with gray hair and a face that always looked grumpy. He didn't talk to many people, and he never talked to Big Shaq. Instead, he watched him. Every time Shaq walked by, Carl would stand by his window, peeking through the curtains. His eyes followed Shaq like a hawk watching a mouse. Carl didn't trust him. Why? Because Big Shaq was black. That's it. That's all it took for Carl to decide Shaq was wrong somehow. Big Shaq knew Carl didn't like him. He'd seen the looks. He'd heard the little mumbles Carl made under his breath sometimes. But Shaq didn't let it bother him. He wasn't the kind of guy to get mad over stuff like that. He just kept living his life, being himself. He figured Carl would get over it someday. Or maybe not. Either way, Shaq wasn't going to change who he was just to make Carl happy. And why should he? This was his home. He had every right to walk down his own street, whistling his tune, enjoying his day. So, there he was, strolling along, minding his own business. The bag of apples swung in his hand. He'd already been to the store and was heading back home. The sun was still high, and the birds were still singing. Big Shaq didn't know it yet, but Carl was watching him again. This time, Carl wasn't just grumpy. He was mad. He'd been sitting on his porch, sipping a lemonade, when he saw Shaq walk by. Something snapped in Carl's head. Maybe it was the way Shaq looked so happy. Maybe it was the way he didn't seem to care about Carl's dirty looks. Whatever it was, Carl decided he'd had enough. He stood up, grabbed his phone, and made a call that would change everything. Now, before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been judged for just being yourself? Maybe someone didn't like the way you look, or the way you talk, or where you're from. It's not fun, right? It makes you feel small, even when you didn't do anything wrong. Big Shaq knew that feeling. He'd felt it before. But he never let it stop him. And this time? Oh, this time was going to be different. This time, the story was about to get wild. Stick around, because what happens next is going to surprise you. Carl thought he was in charge, but Big Shaq had a secret, something nobody in Oakwood saw coming. Want to know what it is? Keep listening, because this sunny afternoon is about to turn into a day no one will forget. Okay, let's talk about Mr. Carl. Carl was the kind of neighbor nobody really liked. He lived in a white house across the street from Big Shaq, and he always looked mad. His face was wrinkly, and his gray hair stuck out in messy clumps. He had this frown like it was stuck there forever, like glue holding it down. Carl wasn't friendly. He didn't wave at kids or say hi to people walking by. Nope. He just sat on his porch or stood by his window, watching everyone with squinty eyes. And the person he watched the most? Big Shaq. Carl didn't like Big Shaq. Not one bit. He never had, not since the day Shaq moved into the yellow house on Maple Street. Every single time Big Shaq walked by, Carl would pull back his curtains just a little and peek out. His lips would move, and he'd mumble stuff under his breath. Things like, "He doesn't belong here," or "What's he doing now?" It was silly, because Shaq wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just living his life. But Carl didn't see it that way. To him, Big Shaq was trouble. Why? Because Shaq's skin was dark. That's all it took for Carl to decide he didn't like him. It wasn't fair, but Carl didn't care about fair. That sunny afternoon, something changed. Big Shaq was walking home from the store, happy as can be. He had a little brown bag in his hand with some apples inside. They were red and shiny, the kind you'd eat with a big crunch. Shaq was whistling a fun little tune, his sneakers tapping the sidewalk. The sun was warm on his face, and he felt good. He didn't know Carl was watching him again. But Carl was watching. He was sitting on his porch, holding a glass of lemonade. His eyes followed Shaq like a cat watching a bird. And this time, Carl wasn't just grumpy. He was angry. Really angry. See, Carl had been mad for a while. Every day, he saw Big Shaq walking around, smiling, talking to people. It bugged him. Why was Shaq so happy? Why did kids wave at him? Why did old ladies like Mrs. Jenkins smile when he helped them? Carl didn't get it. In his head, Shaq didn't fit. He didn't look like most of the people in Oakwood, and that made Carl's stomach twist. He didn't want Shaq there. He wanted him gone. And that day, when Shaq walked by with his apples and his whistle, Carl decided he'd had enough. Enough smiling. Enough walking. Enough Big Shaq. So, Carl stood up. His chair creaked as he moved. He set his lemonade down on the little table by his porch swing. His hands were shaky not because he was scared, but because he was so mad. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It was an old phone with big buttons, the kind you have to press hard to make work. Carl stared at Big Shaq for one more second, his frown getting deeper. Then he punched in 3 numbers, 9-1-1. Yep, he called the police. Right there, on a sunny day, because Big Shaq was walking down the street. Help! Carl said when someone answered. His voice was loud and scratchy, like he was yelling at a dog. There's a strange man walking around. He kept his eyes on Shaq, who was still whistling, totally unaware. He looks dangerous. Carl barked into the phone. Dangerous? Big Shaq? The guy with a bag of apples and a big smile. It didn't make sense. Shaq wasn't holding a stick or a rock or anything scary. He wasn't yelling or running or making trouble. He was just walking home. But Carl didn't care about the truth. He wanted to make Shaq sound bad. He wanted the police to come and take him away. On the other end of the phone, the lady who answered sounded calm. "Can you tell me more, sir?" she asked. Carl huffed, like he was annoyed she didn't just agree right away. "He's big. He's walking around like he owns the place." "I don't know him," Carl said. That was a lie. Carl did know Big Shaq. He'd seen him every day for years. Shaq lived right across the street. But Carl acted like Shaq was some stranger who just showed up out of nowhere. "Hurry," Carl added. "I don't feel safe." Then he hung up, stuffing the phone back in his pocket. He crossed his arms and stood there, waiting. Big Shaq kept walking. He didn't hear Carl's call. He didn't know what was coming. The tune he whistled bounced off the houses, light and happy. He was almost home, just a few more steps to his yellow house. The apples in his bag bumped against his leg with every step. He was thinking about eating one when he got inside, maybe with some peanut butter. He had no idea that Carl was glaring at him from the porch, no idea that trouble was on its way. But it was. Trouble was coming fast. Carl's call wasn't just words. It was like throwing a rock into a pond. Ripples started spreading. The police got the message, and they didn't wait long. In a few minutes, a police car would roll up. Lights would flash. Voices would ask questions. And Big Shaq, who was just walking home with his apples, would be stuck in the middle of it. All because Carl didn't like him. All because Carl saw a tall black man and decided that was enough to make him dangerous. The air in Oakwood didn't feel so peaceful anymore. Not if you knew what Carl had done. The sun was still shining, the birds were still chirping, but something heavy was building. Tension. That's what it's called when things feel tight, like a rubber band stretched too far. Carl wanted Shaq gone, and he thought calling 911 would fix it. He thought he was smart. He thought he'd win. But here's the thing, Big Shaq wasn't just some guy with apples. He was more than that. A lot more. And Carl? He was about to find out he'd made a big mistake. What do you think happens when someone tries to get rid of a good person just because they don't like them? Hang on tight, because this story's about to get even crazier. The sun was still high in the sky when the police car rolled into Oakwood. It came fast, tires humming on the road. The car was white with blue stripes, and its lights flashed red and blue, spinning like a toy top. Two officers climbed out, one tall with brown hair, the other shorter with a shiny badge on his shirt. They looked serious, like they were on a big mission. Big Shaq was just a few steps from his yellow house when he heard the car stop. He turned around, his bag of apples swinging in his hand. His eyebrows went up, and he tilted his head. Why were the police here? He didn't know yet, but he was about to find out. The tall officer stepped forward. "Sir," he said, his voice deep and loud, "we got a call about a suspicious person." He looked Big Shaq up and down, from his red t-shirt to his blue jeans to his sneakers. The shorter officer stood next to him, hands on his hips, watching Shaq like he might run away. Suspicious? Big Shaq didn't get it. He wasn't sneaking around or hiding. He was just walking home. But he didn't get mad. He stayed calm, like always. "Officer," he said, nice and slow, "I live here. Right there, 24 Maple Street." He pointed with his free hand to his little yellow house, just a hop and a skip away. The paint was bright, and the windows sparkled in the sun. It was his house. He wasn't a stranger. Across the street, Carl was watching everything. He stood on his porch, arms crossed tight over his chest. His frown was gone now, replaced by a sneaky little smirk. That's a smile that says, "I got you." Carl thought he'd won. He thought the police would grab Big Shaq and take him away, all because of his 911 call. He leaned against his porch railing, feeling proud. In his head, he was the hero, and Shaq was the bad guy. But Carl didn't know the whole story. Not yet. The tall officer nodded at Shaq's words, but he didn't say, "Oh, okay, sorry," and leave. Nope. He held out his hand and said, "Can we see your ID, sir?" Big Shaq didn't argue. He reached into his pocket with a steady hand and pulled out his wallet. It was black and a little worn, the kind you carry for years. He flipped it open, took out his ID card, and handed it over. "Here you go," he said, still cool as a cucumber. The officer took the card and looked at it. The shorter officer peeked over his shoulder, reading it too. The card had Shaq's name, Shaquille Jackson, and his address, 24 Maple Street, Oakwood. It proved he wasn't lying. He lived there. But here's the thing, the officers didn't leave. They didn't say, "All good, have a nice day," and drive off. Instead, they stayed. The tall one handed the ID back, but then he started asking more questions. "What are you doing here?" he said, like Shaq hadn't just told him. "Why are you walking around?" The shorter officer nodded, like it was a smart question. Big Shaq blinked. He held up his bag of apples. "I went to the store," he said, keeping his voice even. "Just heading home now." It was the truth, simple and clear. But the officers didn't look happy. They glanced at each other, then back at Shaq. "Mind if we ask a few more things?" the tall one said. Shaq's jaw tightened a little, like he was biting down on something. He didn't like this, but he didn't yell or stomp. He just nodded. "Sure," he said. Carl's smirk got bigger. He could see it all from his porch, the police, the questions, Big Shaq standing there with his apples. Carl thought it was going perfectly. He thought the officers would keep pushing until Shaq got mad or scared, and then they'd have a reason to take him away. Carl didn't move. He just watched, waiting for his big win. The neighbors started peeking out too. Mrs. Jenkins, the old lady with the flowers, looked out her window. A kid on a bike slowed down to stare. Everyone could feel something was happening, something not so nice. The tall officer kept talking. "You been here long?" he asked. Big Shaq nodded. "Years," he said. "Lived here for years." The shorter officer wrote something down on a little pad, like it was a clue. "Anyone else with you?" he asked. Shaq shook his head. "Just me." The questions kept coming. Where did he work? Why was he out? Did he know anyone who might call the police? Shaq answered everyone, calm and polite. "I work downtown," he said. "I'm out because it's a nice day. And no, I don't know why you're here." He didn't mention Carl. He didn't point across the street. But his eyes flicked that way for a second, quick as a blink. That's when you could see it. Big Shaq knew something. His face didn't change much, but his jaw stayed tight, and his eyes got a little sharper. He wasn't scared. He wasn't mad. He was ready. Ready for what? The officers didn't know. Carl didn't know. But Shaq did. He had a secret, something big, and he wasn't telling anyone yet. It was like he was holding a surprise in his pocket, waiting for the right time to pull it out. The police kept asking their questions, thinking they were in charge. Carl kept smirking, thinking he'd won. But Shaq? He was cool and quiet, like a superhero who knows the fight isn't over. The air felt heavy now. The sun was still bright, but the fun was gone. Kids stopped playing. Mrs. Jenkins closed her curtains. The police car's lights kept flashing, red and blue, red and blue. Shaq stood there, tall and strong, with his apples in one hand and his secret in his head. The officers didn't back off. "We're just making sure everything's okay," the tall one said, but it didn't sound friendly. Shaq nodded again. "I get it," he said. But you could tell he didn't like it. Who would? Getting stopped on your own street, asked a million questions, all for no reason? It wasn't fair. And it was all because of Carl. Carl didn't move from his porch. His arms stayed crossed, and his smirk stayed put. He thought this was the end. He thought Big Shaq was in trouble now, and he'd be gone soon. But here's a little hint: Carl was wrong. Something was coming, something he didn't expect. Big Shaq wasn't just a guy with apples. He wasn't just a neighbor. He was more. A lot more. And the police? They were about to find out too. This wasn't the end of the story, it was just the start of something huge. Things were looking bad for Big Shaq. The police officers stood there, asking him question after question. The tall one kept talking, and the shorter one kept writing stuff down. Big Shaq stayed calm, holding his bag of apples, but you could tell it wasn't fun. Carl watched from his porch, arms crossed, that sneaky smirk still on his face. He thought he'd won. He thought the police would take Shaq away, and he'd never have to see him again. The sun was shining, the police car lights were flashing, and the whole neighborhood felt quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. It seemed like Carl was about to get his way. But then bam, everything changed. A big, shiny black SUV rolled up fast. It wasn't loud like the police car, but it looked important. The tires crunched on the road as it stopped right behind the police car. The windows were dark, so you couldn't see inside, but you just knew something big was happening. The officers turned their heads quick, like they were surprised. Their hands dropped to their sides, and they stopped talking. Carl's smirk, it was gone in a flash. His eyes got wide, and his mouth opened a little, like he didn't know what to say. Big Shaq looked at the SUV too, but he didn't look scared. Nope. He looked ready. The door of the SUV swung open, and out stepped a woman. She was tall and strong, with a sharp black suit that fit her just right. Her shoes clicked on the pavement, loud and clear. She had short hair pulled back neat, and a shiny badge pinned to her jacket. It sparkled in the sunlight, catching everyone's eye. She walked straight toward the officers, her face serious but not mean. "Stand down," she said, her voice strong and loud enough for everyone to hear. The officers froze, like statues. "That's Shaquille Jackson," she said, pointing at Big Shaq. "He's my client." "Client?" "Yep, you heard it right." Big Shaq wasn't just some guy walking home with apples. He wasn't just a friendly neighbor who waved at kids. He was Shaquille Jackson, a famous lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the kind who won huge cases. He fought against bad companies that cheated people. He took down sneaky politicians who broke the rules. Everyone knew his name well, everyone except Carl and maybe the police. Shaquille Jackson was a big deal, like a superhero with a briefcase instead of a cape. And this woman? She was his helper, his partner, making sure he was okay. Carl's jaw dropped. Literally. His mouth fell open so wide you could see his teeth, and his eyes bugged out like a cartoon. He didn't move from his porch, but you could tell he was shocked. All that time, he thought Big Shaq was just some guy he could push around. He thought calling the police would scare him off. But now he saw the truth, and it hit him like a big, fat surprise. The officers looked shocked too. The tall one rubbed the back of his neck, like he was embarrassed. The shorter one shoved his little notepad in his pocket real quick. Sorry, sir," the tall one mumbled, his voice all shaky. "We didn't know." Big Shaq just smiled. That big, friendly smile he always had. He didn't yell or point fingers. He didn't say, "I told you so." Nope. He was smooth as butter, cool as a breeze. "No harm done," he said, his voice nice and easy. He held up his bag of apples like it was no big deal. "But maybe check the facts next time." The officers nodded fast, like kids who got caught sneaking cookies. They didn't know what to say, so they just stood there, looking silly. The woman in the suit stepped closer to Shaq. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes soft now. Shaq nodded. "Yeah, I'm good," he said. "Thanks for coming, Lisa." Lisa, that was her name. She gave him a little smile, then turned to the officers. "You can go now," she said, not mean, but firm. This was a mistake. The officers didn't argue. They shuffled back to their car, heads down. The tall one got in the driver's seat, and the shorter one hopped in next to him. The lights stopped flashing, and the car pulled away, slow and quiet. They were gone, just like that. Carl was still on his porch, but he didn't look proud anymore. His arms fell to his sides, and his face turned redder than the apples in Shaq's bag. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. What could he say? He'd called the police on a famous lawyer, thinking he was some nobody. He thought he'd get rid of Shaq, but instead, he'd made himself look foolish. Big Shaq Shaquille Jackson stood tall in the street, the sun shining on him like a spotlight. The woman, Lisa, stood next to him, her badge still glinting. They didn't need to yell or fight. The truth was out, and it was bigger than anything Carl could have dreamed. Neighbors started coming out now. Mrs. Jenkins peeked through her window again, her eyes wide. The kid on the bike rode closer, staring at Shaq like he was a movie star. "Is that really him?" the kid whispered to himself. Word was spreading fast. Shaquille Jackson wasn't just a guy with apples. He was a hero, a fighter, someone who made bad guys lose and good people win. And he lived right there, in the yellow house on Maple Street. Carl didn't know it, but he just kicked a hornet's nest. His little plan didn't scare Shaq, it showed everyone who Shaq really was. Big Shaq looked across the street at Carl for a second. He didn't glare or frown. He just gave a tiny nod, like he was saying, "I see you." Then he turned to Lisa. "Let's go inside," he said. "I've got apples to eat." Lisa laughed a short, happy sound and they walked up to his house together. The door opened, then closed, and they were gone. But the story? Oh, it wasn't over yet. Carl's big mistake was just the start. What do you think Carl's face looked like when he realized who Shaq was? Can you picture it? This was the moment everything flipped upside down, and it's only going to get better from here. After the big reveal, everything changed in Oakwood. Big Shaq Shaquille Jackson had been hiding who he really was. He was a famous lawyer, but he didn't want everyone to know. He liked the quiet life in his little yellow house. He was tired of cameras and people shouting his name. That's why he kept it a secret, staying low and just being a friendly neighbor. But Carl's mean trick? It messed that up big time. Carl thought he'd get Shaq in trouble by calling the police, but instead, he let everyone see the truth. And it didn't go the way Carl wanted, not at all. The neighbors couldn't believe it. They started whispering to each other. "That's the Shaquille Jackson," they said, eyes wide. Mrs. Jenkins, the old lady with the flowers, poked her head out her door. "I knew he was nice, but wow," she said. Kids dropped their bikes and ran over, yelling, "Mr. Shaq! Mr. Shaq!" They held out little papers and pens, asking for autographs. Shaq smiled his big smile and signed a few, saying, "Stay in school, okay?" The kids nodded, grinning like he was a superhero. And to them, he kind of was. Carl. He didn't know what to do. He stood on his porch, watching it all. His face turned redder than a ripe tomato. He wasn't smirking anymore. Nope. He looked silly now, like a kid caught stealing candy. Everyone knew he'd called the police for no reason, and it made him look bad. He didn't say a word. He just turned around, walked into his house, and shut the door. Slam. He was gone, hiding inside, probably wishing he'd never picked up that phone. The next day, Shaq did something smart. He went to the police station and filed a complaint. That means he told them Carl was bothering him for no reason, harassment, they call it. Shaq didn't yell or cry about it. He just said, "I don't want trouble, but this isn't right." The police listened. They weren't happy with Carl either. The officers who came to Shaq's street felt dumb for asking all those questions. They didn't like being tricked into Carl's silly game. "We'll handle it," they told Shaq, and he nodded. "Thanks," he said, cool as always. Word spread fast in Oakwood. By lunchtime, everyone knew what happened. Carl called the cops on Shaquille Jackson, people said. Can you believe it? Kids told their parents, parents told their friends, and soon, Carl's name was the one nobody liked. He used to glare at Shaq, but now people glared at him. When he walked outside, folks turned away or shook their heads. Carl didn't feel welcome anymore. He'd tried to make Shaq leave, but instead, he made himself the odd one out. Big Shaq stayed the same, nice, calm, and happy. He didn't need to fight Carl. The truth did that for him. And justice? It was served, big time. Carl learned his lesson the hard way, and Shaq? He just kept being awesome. Big Shaq's story is over, but there's something really cool we can learn from it. He didn't need to yell or brag about who he was. He didn't stand in the street shouting, "I'm Shaquille Jackson, the famous lawyer." Nope. He stayed quiet and let his actions tell everyone the truth. He helped kids, carried bags for old ladies, and smiled at people even when Carl was mean to him. That's what made him special. He didn't fight with loud words or fists. He just kept being himself, and that was enough. When the big reveal happened, it wasn't Shaq who made Carl look silly, it was Carl's own bad choices. Shaq's goodness shone bright, like the sun on a clear day. And Carl? Oh boy, he learned a tough lesson. He thought he could judge Big Shaq just by looking at him. He saw a tall black guy and decided, he's trouble. But he was so wrong. Judging someone by how they look is like picking a book because of its cover. You might miss the best story inside. Carl's plan backfired big time. Instead of getting rid of Shaq, he made himself the one nobody liked. His face turned red, and he hid in his house, all because he didn't see the real Shaq. That's what happens when you're mean for no reason. It comes back to bite you. So, here's the big takeaway: don't judge a book by its cover. That means don't decide someone's bad or good just because of their skin, their clothes, or where they live. The quiet guy next door, the one who doesn't talk much, might be the coolest person ever. He might be a hero, a helper, or someone who changes everything just like Big Shaq. You never know what's hiding behind a smile or a wave. People can surprise you, and that's what makes life fun. If Carl had been nice instead of nosy, maybe he'd have a friend in Shaq instead of a big mess. Think about your own life. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be way more awesome than you thought? Maybe a kid at school who seemed shy but was super smart? Or a neighbor who looked grumpy but helped you one day? That's the magic of giving people a chance. You don't have to be loud or famous to be great. You just have to be you, like Shaq was. And if someone judges you wrong, don't worry, keep being good, and the truth will come out, just like it did in Oakwood. What do you think? Did Carl get what he deserved? I think he did. He tried to be mean, and it flopped. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Did this story make your heart race? Did you cheer when Shaq's secret came out? If you liked it, give it a big thumbs up. Stories like this are all about surprises and fairness, and I've got more wild tales coming your way. Stick around, because next time, we'll dive into another adventure that'll keep you guessing. Be nice, be brave, and see you soon.